Hello everyone, I've got a very exciting game for you today. Hopefully this makes up for the fact I haven't done any videos for the past week or two. I've just started playing in the British Chess Championship qualifying stage because the way they're doing it online this year is that the top 10 players, I believe, who are all Grandmasters or International Masters, qualify automatically. And then there's a 5-round kind of open section of the qualifying stage where after 5 rounds the top either 10 or 12 players qualify, and then on top of the 10 players who are the titled players, those 20 or so are then in the finals of the championship, and then they play a few rounds and there's a winner eventually. So the time control for all these games is 45 minutes plus a 15-second increment. I've just finished round 1, and round 2 and 3 are tomorrow on the 19th of December. So this first game, as is the case with first rounds, is what you expect to be an easy opponent if you're high rated, or an incredibly difficult opponent if you're the lower rated one. But that doesn't mean I should underestimate anybody I am playing here. I'm playing James Holyhead, who is an improving player, I believe. And he started with d4 as white. I played knight f6, c4, and I do not play my Budapest, my trademarked line, because there was a chance he could have prepared for me, and also against somebody who is significantly lower rated than me, I felt I could try out an opening I hadn't yet. I have played it before, but I haven't really kind of delved into the depths of the opening. I played a Nimzo with e6, inviting knight c3. If white plays knight f3, I can go into the Queen's Indian, or I can play the Bogo Indian with bishop b4 check. Knight c3, and bishop b4 is what I played. So in the Nimzo, black usually gives up their bishop for the knight to double up the white pawns, and can often play into very kind of closed or semi-open positions at best, where white will attempt to open the game up for their two bishops, and I will attempt to manage how much space white gets and how many open lines there are. And the black knights can sometimes prey on the weak white pawns. So f3 was played. It's an unusual move, but it does have some merit to it. These days with computer analysis, generally when white plays f3 this early in the game, computers have not liked it up until now, partly because it prevents the knight on g1 from moving to its usual f3 position. But if white can build up a very strong centre of pawns with the move e4, then it does have justification. I played d5 to try and make e4 less appealing. a3 was played by white, and normally you're meant to take the knight here, double the white pawns, and then continue on, sometimes by castling, but there are a few alternative moves. I chose a rare line, bishop e7, where essentially black is saying that even though he's lost a tempo with bishop to b4 back to e7, white has made a few small weaknesses in their position. The move a3 has weakened some of their light squares on the queen's side. The c4 pawn especially might be vulnerable in the future. And also with the move f3, it's harder for white to develop their pieces. So black is essentially saying that I want to keep my bishop pair, and essentially say that white has possibly lost time with their pawn moves. My opponent doesn't agree and shoves e4. The point of f3 is revealed. e4 can now be done. And I am not entirely playing the right move. I believe taking on e4 is technically correct, but I find the lines quite boring, to be honest, because of knight takes e4, and then we can trade lots of pieces, and I don't like these kind of positions where black doesn't have a lot of initiative. and white does have the central space advantage. So I try this castling move, and it's only been played a few times because white can win a pawn. He chose to do it in a different way than I had anticipated. I thought c takes d5 would be played, and then takes and e5. So if I play knight to d7, then d5 drops. My plan was knight h5 because there's lines of the English opening where you can guess away with this. Essentially what will happen is that the black knight can go to g7 and drop back after having played the move g6. And if white tries g4 immediately to trap the knight, then black does have a lot of counter chances with bishop h4 check. And the white king gets put on a very sort of strange journey where it will be in the centre of the board for the rest of the game. And black can often get lots of initiative for it. So f4 is the move I would have expected, and then g6. Bishop e2, and it turns out I would have played knight g7, but an interesting computer line is knight c6, playing with fire. White can take the knight, doubling up black's pawns, leaving the king exposed to the elements, but the d4 pawn of white is vulnerable to from the black knight. So if white's queen goes over to take the pawn, they will lose their central pawn. Knight f3 is more prudent, but then black's h-pawn is no longer being attacked by the queen. So after the cool-looking bishop f5, it turns out to be about equal, possibly with a very small advantage for black, just because of the two bishops. So, very interesting position, and one that I will research more thoroughly. This line, though, did not happen. White instead chose the move e5 immediately, and here, because the e6 pawn for black is still on the board, I can't play knight h5. I won't have enough initiative. So I played knight to d7, and I was very surprised at white's next move. I believed they were going to take me, and here I had chosen to play the move knight to b6, and I thought that even though I had never seen this position in my life, it actually doesn't look as bad as it appears. Black's bishops will soon come to life if white takes on e6. White will have a weak d4 pawn, a backward pawn, for the rest of the game, and rapid development of their pieces. It turns out, though, that I was wrong. This has been played once in a game by Michal Marin, who was white, in 1992, I believe, and the game was drawn. This is according to Chess Tempo. With d takes e6, bishop takes e6, and then the computer analysis here is that bishop e3, knight c6, and the game is about equal, but a very small advantage to black, just because of the connected rooks and white's weaknesses of the f3 pawn again is forcing the knight on g1 to go to e2, and then black has moves like knight c4 or knight d5 or rook d8, and white, I suspect, will have to give up their pawn on d4 later in the game. Almost like a reversed Smith-Morra gambit in some ways. My opponent did not choose to take the pawn. Possibly he saw that this might give me some compensation, but also he may have been thinking that a supposedly stronger player would not just give a pawn for nothing, so he may have thought that I was still in my theory, which I was not. He played bishop d3, and I feel like this is a bit inaccurate, because I can take on c4, gaining time on the bishop. And this position, I'm sure I've had either this exact position or one's extremely similar to it. But oddly enough, the position I know I've had this position when white's pawn has been on f2, and I actually think white is better with the pawn on f2 than on f3, due to the lack of mobility for the g1 knight again. I played c5, and white's pawns are fixed on e5 and d4, so it's now easier for me to target the pawns. White ended up defending, and I captured, undermining the e5 pawn, and then knight c6. So I'm aiming at the pawn twice. White has to defend it, and I think he chose the best way of playing f4. Here I could take their bishop and claim I had the two bishops with a small edge. I am aware though that my knight on d7, bishop on c8, and my queen and my rooks are all very inactive. I chose the move knight b6 instead, because this attacks both white's bishops. The d4 bishops now attack twice, queen and knight, and the c4 bishop is undefended, attacked by my knight. The only way for white to not lose a bishop for nothing is to capture on b6, which allows me to play queen takes b6, and I have improved my d7 knight by trading it off for a bishop, and my queen has now activated, potentially threatening checks, and the b2 pawn. My rook on f8 also has d8, which will become useful in the future with the open file. And white essentially had to just give up the bishop pair and moot the same piece 3 times. Their bishop on c1 went to e3, d4, and then traded itself on b6. White is really badly behind in development. Knight ge2 was played. Very good move, actually. I had missed this move when I first had looked at this position in my head. And the reason I'd missed this move was I was convinced white had to guard b2. But I was wrong. If I take on b2, can you see white's best move, which will make me think twice? So this is the poisoned pawn, according to Bobby Fischer, where in some cases black can get away with taking it and then retreat their queen and claim they are a pawn ahead. But in other lines, if black is not extremely careful, they will lose their queen. And in this case, knight to a4 is giving my queen no squares. So I have to give up my bishop in some way with bishop b4 check. And if they don't take me, I have queen d2, which will give my queen the escape route. But giving up a bishop is not really something I want to be entertaining as a possibility. So I decided that I would not risk taking the pawn and simply improve my pieces with rook d8. White offers the trade of queens. Here, because I have the two bishops, I was thinking that I could take off the queens and claim a small advantage. So with the capture, I can then continue on with b6, which will allow my bishop on c8 to improve, connecting my two rooks together. And after bishop a6 or bishop b7, I felt like I had a small edge, but nothing really to brag about. White has more space than me with their e5 and f4 pawns. And the computer backs me up. It says that the advantage for black is only about 0.3, which is still very nice. I won't complain about having an advantage for black, but I felt like I could have more by keeping the queens on. And I was correct. White's king is very weak, so the person who benefits from the queen's trading is white. Their king being weak is no longer much of an issue. I infiltrate with queen e3. And if white allows my queen to stick around, then they could seriously be in trouble with my bishop on e7 coming to c5, or even my knight coming to d4 with attacks on the queen. So white found a very good move, I think. It's probably the best move on the board. And it tries to solve the problem of my queen, trade pieces, and improve white's position. Knight d5. And I had to spend a little while on this. I had seen this move when I played queen e3 and worked out that it was not too bad for me overall. And a lot of interesting moves here. I'd whittled it down to either queen takes queen, and if they take back my queen straight away, I'll grab their knight for free. But they have the in-between move, the Zwischenzug, knight takes bishop check. I would have to take back Then they take the queen. White has got back the bishop pair, so neither of us has it anymore. I'm a bit worse in space, and I think that even though my bishop comes to c6 or to b7 in 2 moves, I just don't think I have enough to really claim advantage. And again, the computer backs me up. It seems to think it's only about minus 0.1 or completely equal. And I don't really want this kind of ending against a player who's about 1500, because it's not too difficult to play this. It's fairly easy if you're good at strategy in the ending, and I don't yet know much about my opponent. I haven't studied lots of games or had any experience playing them in the past. So it could be the case that their ending is really strong, but their middle game is much weaker. I don't want to risk this and potentially draw. So there was a game in the book Chess for Zebras by Jonathan Rowson, which I believe was published in 2005, but it might have been 2002 or around there. And in it, he gives a great example of how sometimes you kind of subconsciously know something is a good move, or you see an idea and you can't quite see the justification for it, but again, your subconscious mind is telling you to do it because on some level you know it's good, but consciously you can't articulate why or even if it's any good. And he gives the example in the book of finding, I believe it's a check, or it's a bishop move, I think, which provokes his opponent to make a pawn move, and then later on, about 4 or 5 moves later in this long sequence of moves against, I think it's John Ems, it's proven that his opponent's pawn move, which he induced, weakened their position enough for Rowson to actually win the game. And here, my move is not nearly as impressive, and it's not as shrouded in mystery. But I find the only move that gives me the advantage, bishop h4 check. If white decides to move the king, there will either be checkmates or horrible pins on them. So white has to play g3, weakening their position. And now I found a very useful move, queen to e4, where I am attacking the rook. Again, if I play queen takes queen, I'm releasing tension, trading queens when white desperately doesn't want the queens on the board. And I can make white double up their pawns, but I do lose the bishop pair. And I can go for the odd cheapo bishop g4. My threat is bishop takes knight, and then knight d4 check, forking their king and bishop. But white has several ways to avoid this. It's not particularly difficult, and rook d1 is one way to do it. So knight d4 is no longer a playable move. I've got an isolated pawn, which is also a passer, so it's a real toss-up whether it's weak or not. And white has the open g file to compensate for the weaknesses of the pawn structure. So again, I don't really want this kind of ending where it's arguable if I'm better, or if I'm like a little better or a lot better. I want something a lot more clear-cut than these hypothetical advantages. So with queen e4, what I really like about this is white's pieces are almost all being attacked. Their rook is being attacked by the queen, the bishop's being pressured by my queen, the knight's being attacked by the pawn, and their knight, the other knight on e2 is pinned. So the king is also being somewhat attacked. And my own bishop is hanging, but it can't be taken yet. And I had thought white could not do the move that they played. I was very surprised by the response from white here. I thought rook f1 was the only move. And then it's, to me, clear that I have the advantage. I can grab the knight, and then bishop d3, so I need to be very, very careful here. Can you see what's wrong with queen to e3? Yeah, it's a nice tactical motif, but the pieces are essentially 90 degrees at an angle. Normally it's the case that the white queen's on d1, black queen on d4, but it's the same tactic. If the white queen was not blocked in by their bishop, they could simply capture my queen if their bishop wasn't on d3. So with that in mind, bishop takes h7 is a discovered attack on my queen. It's check, so I have to deal with it, and then I will lose the queen and the game. And it appears my queen doesn't really have many other places to head to. Queen g2, though, does save me, but then I lose the bishop, and it's awkward. So I'd found the move knight to d4, where if white takes my queen, I will take their queen. My knight will be attacking their rook, and my pawn on d5 attacking their bishop. So they will not have time to sort of organise and be okay here. If queen d1, keeping an eye on their bishop to prevent my queen capturing it, I have several moves that are strong, but I had simply decided to play queen to e3. If my bishop is taken, then knight f3 wins the exchange and is a very simple move, but I had thought bishop g4 may even be stronger, putting lots of pressure on their pinned knight. And knight f3 is also playable next turn. So great position for black. In the game, what happened was white was able to castle queenside, because the king is not travelling through check, even though my queen is controlling the b1 square. And the reason I thought that this could not or would not be played is that I could take the knight. But then what I spotted was that bishop d3, queen check, king b1, and I can't save the bishop because on h4, because then bishop takes h7 is again winning my queen. I had missed a move which is very hard to see from several moves back, but it's easier to see it now. How can you improve your pieces by making them more active, and also prevent bishop takes h7 check? So it's a very nice move. Yeah, bishop e7 loses instantly. I can actually play bishop to f5. And now their bishop is pinned, because if their bishop takes mine, their own queen is vulnerable. And I'm now attacking their bishop, and also, potentially, able to take their knight on e2, because the bishop is pinned to the king from my own bishop. So it's not really being protected. So lots and lots of tactics in this match. In the actual game, though, I chickened out. I didn't take the knight because of all this potential attacks on my queen, which I was afraid of it being trapped. I played a very nice move, though, which is actually the strongest move on the board. And I liked it because everything hangs. I played knight to a5. So now both their knights are being attacked. Their rook on h1, the bishop and the queen are both being attacked. White appears to have counterattacks, but none of them work. For example, so I haven't included this move because there's a very nice way I can stop it. Knight f6 at first looks like that white's winning, because when I take the knight with my pawn, my rook is being attacked by their rook, and I will lose it to a check. Then I'm on the back foot. But I do have the move, saving my bishop temporarily. Bishop takes knight, defending my rook. And white can't really take the bishop, because I take the queen with check, so white cannot mate me on d8 at any stage. Instead of knight to f6, it turns out there's a very complicated line with queen b4. And I think knight takes bishop is correct, but you can also take the knight. White saves the bishop, and then I think the queen trade is best, according to the computer, although I probably would have done queen e3. And then, after knight c6, black does give back the minor piece, but apparently is just so much better in terms of pawn structure that it's clearly better for black. Again, I don't really like this line though, because it's still a little difficult for me to win. And again, I want something nice and easy without any complications. So I would have probably done either queen takes c4 or maybe even knight c4. And here I'm just a bishop up. Their knight on d5 is being attacked. So knight c7 is the most critical line. Rook b8, so my bishop is still guarding the rook. Now it isn't. But then, strangely enough, bishop d7 traps the knight on c7. So fairly soon I will end up winning the knight. a6 prevents knight b5. And rook on b8 will go to c8, winning the knight, and most likely winning the match. Instead of all these moves, the game position from here was queen to e3, and apparently I'm just meant to take the bishop with check, queen takes, which, to be honest, is a move I just sort of missed. I mean, I'd seen it was possible, but for some reason I discounted it because of some sort of tactic. But it is the best move. I think it was because my bishop on h4 has no safe squares. But I think what I had forgotten was I can simply capture the knight on d5 as well. So I'd win 2 pieces for 1. In the game I took the knight, which also is very, very strong. Queen takes, pawn takes, and their bishop is hanging. So I had thought I was easily winning. But after the move g takes h4, I can't take the bishop. Well, I mean, I can, but I get mated. However, I have a very active move which does win, and I had seen this when I first took the knight, which is bishop g4, which when I planned to take the knight originally, I think I'd seen this move as a backup, so I was fairly certain I was winning anyway, and I think I was about 40% sure that I could have actually taken the bishop for free, and then about 60% sure that there was something wrong with it, and I spotted what was wrong with it before this position was on the board. But I saw that as a bailout move, or as a backup move, I had bishop g4, and the knight on e2 is potentially hanging because their bishop is also weak. So if they move their bishop off the diagonal protecting their knight, I will capture it. And after bishop b5, or rook takes rook and then bishop b5, I play a6, and the bishop cannot stay protecting its knight without giving its own life. So I will win the piece and then win the game fairly comfortably. So rook to g1 is a move which attempts to just trade bishops, but then I have the very nice bishop f3, and I'm maintaining the threats at the same time as saving the bishop, and white doesn't have a good response. 1-0, I think, or 0, or 0-1, I suppose. Black's going to win. So finally, onto the game. White, I think, saw this after pawn takes bishop, or possibly they didn't, and they played the desperado bishop takes f7 check. And I feel like this waves the white flag. It's immediately giving me the piece. And then I still have rook takes rook. I could have played bishop g4 first, but I wanted to trade off as many pieces as I could when I'm ahead like this. So this guaranteed a trade of rooks. And then bishop g4 as before. I'm now trading a minor piece at the least. And I was hoping for rook d2, where I had knight b3 forking king and rook. But you can't always get what you want. And next up, I think rook d8 or rook c8 will be the best moves. I decided, though, on knight b3 check. What this does is it sets a few traps, and it improves the knight as well. The white king has a difficult choice of where to go. There aren't really any appealing squares. king c2 was chosen, and then I chose to capture the knight. Because now, with another trade of minor pieces, it makes my victory that much easier to achieve. If white captures the bishop, attempting to have rook and knight against rook, where the knight occasionally can't prove itself equal to winning the game, only enough for a draw, I would be able to get rid of my knight by winning the exchange, and then I can very easily win with just a rook against a king. King takes knight, then anchoring my bishop. I wasn't sure whether to put it on d3 or on f3, because both of them protect my pawn. But in the end I thought that I wanted the open file for my rook, so rook d8 would allow it free rein to go to d2 or d1, and my bishop on if it was on d3 it would be blocking my path. So this felt like the better move. Rook c1, then king e6. All I wanted to do there was prevent white playing the move pawn f5, and I'm going to almost certainly get checked on c7 anyway, so I may as well move my king now. And sure enough, rook c7. Then I could have played e3, but white can then do stuff like rook c3 or rook c1, and also their king can start marching up towards the pawn. So first off, I finally moved my rook after 28 moves with rook d8, simply cutting off the white king and forcing white into the decision of whether to try and hold the pawn off as long as they can with rook c3, and then I can trade rooks with rook d3, or to bring their king over, which will be not that useful as my rook is cutting them off, or to capture a pawn, and they did. Now I continue with e3. My rook, bishop and pawn combined are a great team. White doesn't really have a good way to prevent it becoming a queen promotion. They try f5 check. And I think I did the right move here. I did king takes f5, and after rook check. Now, it may appear obvious that if I take the pawn on e5 I lose the bishop, but there was another reason I didn't take the pawn, which is after king e4 there are no checks from their rook, which don't lose it. So surprisingly their e5 pawn is actually helping my king. White has no way to stop my pawns, so they push their own one. And I push, they push, and here I'm not silly enough to play pawn equals queen, because I would then lose my rook and white would then be winning. So I played rook b8 check. Rook e8 is stronger, but I just thought this was easy. King guessing to safety, and then I promote. White desperately tries to get the counterplay they need. If I take the rook, they take back, and then it's a challenge for me to win. I'm sure I can, but I don't really want to experiment with trying to win queen and bishop versus queen. Instead, I thought I played a very nice move. I was thinking about rook takes b2, which I was sure was winning, but I don't really want to give up a whole rook just for speculation. And here, for some reason, I didn't see the mate after king b3. Bishop d1 is mating in a few turns. And king a1, queen c1, and then a very nice move, bishop h5, which completely destroys any chance for white to promote to a queen and maybe even win the game or draw. I did have another way of winning, which was to keep checking with my queen and maneuver my queen and bishop into a mate. But that's a lot of effort. This requires very little. The game, though, I thought was a lot more controlled, and therefore I was prouder of playing this move than playing rook b2. I played the move king d4. So now if white promotes to a queen, I will capture with the rook, and my own queen is protecting e8 when white promotes. So they're not winning anything at all. And I suspected that white would play rook takes rook, on b8. Then I had bishop d5 check, pawn blocks, and I do have an easy win with queen e7, or I could have gone the more difficult route with queen d2, then king c3, and the mate on b2 is decisive. White has no way to really prevent the checkmates. Can throw in a couple of checks just for the sake of it, and then they're powerless. So promotion to a queen, and then queen a2 mate, which is the alternative to queen e7. I think white hoped I'd pre-moved or done something silly. They tried rook d8 check. And again, I could play complicated with rook takes rook, and then pawn takes equals queen, and then I block the check with bishop d5, and I'm sure I'm winning, but again, there's no reason to allow this. I played bishop d5 first, check, and white played b3, and very soon after had to resign because queen d2 check, king to the a1 square, and I think queen c3 does win, but I just chose a simpler queen d1 check. White had to give in, because no matter what, I'm going to take on b3 with something, with a check. So if king to b2, I would take with the rook, and then play queen at b1 mate. And if king to the a2 square, then queen to the b3 pawn, taking it. And here I have several checkmates. I think I count 4 checkmates. But there might be more of them that I'm missing somehow. I can see a3, a2, b3, b1. b2, b1 from the b3 square. So 4 different queen mates, which is good enough. I'm happy with that amount of checkmates. So overall, I thought a very good game. I was playing with fire a little bit in the middle game part of the match, with all these tactics with my own queen potentially being trapped if I wasn't careful. But I felt like white just didn't castle early enough, and they moved too many pawns early in the match, which led to them having lots of weaknesses but left behind. But overall, I think they're an improving player, because I wouldn't have expected a 1500 to last this long against me, to be honest. Lasting 40 moves is an achievement. So I guess good luck to them for the rest of their tournament. Hopefully they perform well. And I will be doing more videos on this tournament in the next few days as I play them. Alright, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.